What does it mean to carry 10,000 years of memory inside a single body? That is not a metaphorical question. The show answers it, literally, across 61 episodes. It answers it in the way a 12-year-old boy with an arrow on his head closes his eyes and sees faces he has never met, hears voices he has never heard, feels grief for losses that happened centuries before he was born. It answers it in the way that boy sits on the back of a lion turtle on the last night of the war and asks 4 dead strangers what he should do with the life of a man who wants to burn the world, and every one of them tells him something different. The Avatar is not a title. It is not a job. It is a chain of human beings stretching backward through time, each one shaped by the failures of the one before, each one leaving behind a world that the next one has to fix. And the show Avatar: The Last Airbender is quietly one of the most serious examinations of inherited responsibility ever put on television. Not because it announces that ambition, because it earns it, scene by scene, life by life, across a mythology so carefully constructed that the weight of it does not become fully clear until the final hour. This is Ember, and tonight we are going to walk through every Avatar in the show's history, not as a list, not as a ranking, as a story. The story of what it costs to be the bridge between the human world and the spirit world, told through the lives of the people who carried that burden, in the order the show chose to reveal them to you. Settle in, this will take a while. The first thing the show tells you about the Avatar is that one is missing. The very first lines of narration, spoken by Katara over images of the 4 elements, establish that the world has been at war for 100 years, and that the Avatar, the only person who can master all 4 elements, has vanished. That framing is doing something specific. It is not introducing the Avatar as a hero. It is introducing the Avatar as an absence, the hole in the world that the war grew inside. Before you ever meet Aang, before you ever see a single past life or hear the word reincarnation, the show has already told you the most important thing about the Avatar cycle. The Avatar matters most when the Avatar is not there. When Katara and Sokka crack open the iceberg in the first episode, which aired on February 21st, 2005, and find a boy frozen in a sphere of light, the show begins a process that will take 3 full seasons to complete. It will introduce Aang as a child who ran away from his destiny, and then it will spend the rest of its run showing him every Avatar who came before, one at a time, each revealed at the exact moment when their story illuminates something about his. That structure is not an accident. The show does not dump its mythology all at once. It does not give you a lecture on the Avatar cycle in the pilot and move on. Instead, it parcels out the past lives like clues in a mystery, each one arriving when Aang needs it, each one answering a question that the show has been quietly asking for episodes. By the time you reach the finale, you do not just know what the Avatar is. You feel the weight of it. You feel it because you have watched Aang feel it, one predecessor at a time, and you have watched each predecessor's story change the way he understands himself. That is the architecture we are going to trace tonight. The order matters, the timing matters. The show knew exactly when to introduce each life and why, and we are going to honour that design by following it. There is something else worth understanding before we begin. The show's creators, Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, structured the series as 3 books, each named after an element Aang must master. Book 1, Water. Book 2, Earth. Book 3, Fire. The first episode aired on February 21st, 2005. The final episode aired on July 19th, 2008. In between, 61 episodes. And within those 61 episodes, the mythology of the Avatar is parcelled out with a precision that borders on architectural. No piece of information arrives before you are ready for it. No revelation comes without the groundwork to support it. The past Avatars are not decorations. They are load-bearing walls. Pull one out and the structure collapses. Understanding that structure and why it works is the project of this video. We are not ranking Avatars. We are not deciding who was the best or the worst. We are watching a show teach you, slowly and carefully, what it means for one person to carry the weight of history inside their own body and how that weight shapes every decision they make. The Avatars are not separate characters. They are one character, refracted through time, each incarnation a different answer to the same impossible question. Let us begin where the show begins. Not with the past, but with the first glimpse of it. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The first past avatar that the show gives you a name and a face is Roku, and the way it introduces him is a masterclass in how to build mythology without stopping the plot. Book 1, Episode 7 is called Winter Solstice. Part 1, The Spirit World. In it, Aang visits a village that has been attacked by a spirit named Hei Bai, and during the encounter, he is pulled into the spirit world for the first time. While there, he sees a dragon. The dragon belongs to someone, but the episode does not tell you who. It holds that information back, lets the image sit, and moves on. The payoff comes immediately in the next episode. Winter Solstice Part 2, Avatar Roku, is the 8th episode of Book 1. It aired on April the 15th, 2005, and it is in many ways the episode where Avatar The Last Airbender announces what kind of show it is going to be. Not a Monster of the Week adventure cartoon, a serialized epic with a mythology that stretches back centuries. The premise is deceptively simple. Aang has to reach a Fire Nation temple on a volcanic island before the sun sets on the winter solstice, so he can speak to the spirit of his predecessor, Avatar Roku. To get there, he has to fly Appa through a Fire Nation naval blockade commanded by Zhao. He is being chased by Zuko. He arrives at the temple and discovers that the Fire Sages, who were once loyal to the Avatar, now serve the Fire Lord. One sage, Shu, remains loyal and helps Aang reach the inner sanctuary. All of that is plot. Good plot, well executed, with rising stakes and satisfying action. But the reason this episode matters to the mythology of the Avatar is what happens when Aang finally enters the sanctuary and speaks to Roku. Roku tells Aang about Sozin's comet. He explains that the comet gave the Fire Nation the power to start the war 100 years ago, and that it will return by summer's end, giving the Fire Nation the power to finish what it started. Aang has until then to master all 4 elements and defeat the Fire Lord. That is the ticking clock that drives the entire series, and it comes from a dead man. The show places the single most important piece of narrative information in the story, not in the mouth of a living character, not in a prophecy or a book, but in a conversation between a 12-year-old and his own previous incarnation. The source of the information matters. Roku is not a mentor in the traditional sense. He is not Gandalf or Dumbledore, an older figure who exists in the present to guide the hero. He is something stranger. He is the hero from before. He has already lived and died in this same role, carrying the same burden, and he failed. The comet came the first time because Roku could not stop Sozin. Now it is coming again because Roku is dead, and Aang was frozen in ice for a century. The very existence of the ticking clock is a consequence of a previous Avatar's failure. That is a staggering amount of thematic weight for the 8th episode of a children's animated show, and the show handles it with complete confidence, neither over-explaining nor underplaying it. Roku appears, speaks clearly, delivers the information Aang needs, and then does something extraordinary. He manifests through Aang's body, taking physical form inside the temple, and destroys the entire structure, allowing Aang, Katara, and Sokka to escape. It is the first time the show demonstrates that the past avatars are not just memories. They can act, they have power, they are, in some real sense, still present inside Aang, and under the right circumstances they can take over. The implications of that will unfold across the entire series, but in this moment, in this episode, the show has done something precise. It has introduced the idea of the Avatar's past lives not as backstory, but as active force. Roku is dead, but he is not gone. His wisdom, his power, and his failures are all living inside a 12-year-old boy who does not fully understand any of them yet. The past is not past. That is the foundational insight of the Avatar mythology, and the show plants it here, 8 episodes in, and then lets it grow for the next 53. There is a detail in this episode that is easy to overlook, but that repays close attention. When Aang enters the sanctuary, the room is structured around a massive portrait of Roku on the wall. The Fire Sages explain that the doors to the sanctuary can only be opened by a fully realized avatar, or by 5 simultaneous blasts of fire bending from the sages themselves. The doors are a fire-bending lock, designed in an era when the Fire Sages served the Avatar. The architecture of the temple tells a story that the dialogue does not. This was a building constructed for the Avatar. The flames on the doors are aligned to respond to the Avatar's presence. The entire island, crescent-shaped, volcanic, remote, was chosen as a site of communion between the living Avatar and the dead ones. And now that building has been turned against its original purpose. The sages serve Ozai. The temple that was built to connect Aang to his heritage has become a trap designed to deliver him to the people trying to destroy it. The show is doing something structural here that it will repeat across all 3 seasons. It takes an institution or a tradition that was created to serve the Avatar and shows you how it has been been corrupted, co-opted, or abandoned. The Fire Sages in this episode, the Dai Li in Book 2, the White Lotus hinted at in scattered moments and then revealed in full in Book 3. Each of these institutions was created to support the Avatar's mission. Each of them has been warped by time, politics, or power into something its creators would not recognize. And each of them tells you something about the gap between the Avatar's purpose and the world's reality. The one sage who remains loyal, Shu, is a crucial character. He represents the idea that institutions can be corrupted, but individuals within them can still choose integrity. Shu risks his life to help Aang reach the sanctuary. He is arrested for it, and his arrest is a small tragedy that the show does not dwell on, but that reverberates if you let it. A man who honored his oath to serve the Avatar is punished for it by a government that claims the Avatar's authority for itself. The Fire Nation does not oppose the concept of the Avatar. It claims the Avatar's legacy while trying to capture or kill the actual Avatar. That is a more sophisticated form of villainy than simple opposition, and the show plants it here, in this episode, long before it becomes the explicit theme of Book 3. What makes Roku's introduction particularly effective is how little the show reveals about him as a person. In this episode, he is a function. He delivers information. He demonstrates power. He looks like a wise old man with a long white beard and Fire Nation robes, but the show tells you almost nothing about who he was, what choices he made, what he got right, what he got wrong. That restraint is deliberate. The show is saving Roku's story for later, for an episode that will not air until more than 2 years after this one. And when it finally tells that story, it will recontextualize everything you thought you knew about the beginning of the war. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. The show is patient, and so must we be. The next past Avatar to receive significant screen time is not Roku, it is Kyoshi, and she arrives, as Kyoshi tends to, with a level of directness that leaves very little room for misunderstanding. The show first mentions Kyoshi in Book 1, Episode 4, The Warriors of Kyoshi, which aired on March 4th, 2005. The episode takes the group to Kyoshi Island, a small island in the Earth Kingdom, named after the Avatar who created it. You learn that Kyoshi was an Earth Kingdom Avatar. You see her statue. You meet the Kyoshi warriors, an all-female fighting force that dresses in her image and fights with her techniques. But you do not see Kyoshi herself. She is a legacy, a name, a set of traditions. The show treats her as history, not character. That changes in Book 2. Avatar Day is the 5th episode of Book 2, Earth. It aired on April 28, 2006. The episode is, on its surface, a lighter entry in the season, a breather between heavier storylines. Team Avatar arrives at an Earth Kingdom village that celebrates something called Avatar Day, which turns out to be a festival of burning Avatar effigies. The villagers hate the Avatar because they believe that Avatar Kyoshi murdered their founder, Chin the Great, 370 years ago. Aang, being Aang, decides to submit himself to the village's justice system to clear the Avatar's name. The comedy of the episode is Sokka playing detective, complete with a bubble pipe and magnifying glass, trying to prove Kyoshi's innocence. But the episode's most important moment is not comedic at all. It is the moment when Kyoshi herself shows up. Aang puts on Kyoshi's old uniform, which has been preserved on Kyoshi Island for centuries, and as he stands in the village square, Kyoshi manifests through his body, just as Roku did at the Fire Temple. But Kyoshi does not come to help Aang escape. She comes to confess. She tells the villagers, through Aang's body, that she did confront Chin. She tells them he was a conqueror, not a hero. She tells them she separated her peninsula from the mainland using the Avatar state, creating Kyoshi Island, and that Chin was too stubborn to move from the crumbling cliff edge. He fell to his death. Kyoshi does not apologize. She does not soften the story. She does not call it an accident or express regret. She states flatly that she would do it again. Hold that image for a moment. A previous incarnation of the Avatar, speaking through the body of a 12-year-old pacifist monk, confessing to what amounts to manslaughter and expressing zero remorse. The show plays it past partly for comedy, with Aang's friends reacting in horror as their legal defense collapses. But underneath the comedy, something serious is happening. The show is telling you that the avatars do not agree with each other. They do not share values. They do not share methods. Kyoshi was a warrior who believed in decisive action and accepted the consequences of that action, even lethal ones. Aang is a monk who cannot bring himself to hurt anyone. They are the same person in some spiritual sense, and they could not be more different. That tension between who Aang is and who his past lives were becomes the central tension of the entire series, and it begins here in a comedy episode with Kyoshi's unapologetic confession. The show does not underline this. It does not have Aang sit down afterward and reflect on what it means that one of his past lives killed a man and felt justified doing so. It lets the moment land and moves on, trusting that the audience will carry the implication forward. The show trusts you. It trusts that you will remember Kyoshi's face, her voice, her certainty, when the time comes for Aang to decide whether or not to kill Fire Lord Ozai. There is a production detail worth noting here. The writers, John O'Brien, wrote this episode and Lauren McMullen directed it, chose to have Kyoshi manifest through Aang's body while he is wearing her clothes. The visual is deliberate. Aang, small, bald, young, transforms into a towering woman in full warrior's paint. His body physically changes. He grows taller. His face becomes hers. The voice that comes out of his mouth is not his voice. It is Kyoshi's voice, confident and uncompromising. The transformation is not gentle. It is not a whisper or a vision. It is a takeover. Kyoshi does not ask permission. She arrives. Compare this to how Roku manifests. Roku has appeared through Aang twice by this point in the series, once at the Fire Temple and once during the Deserter, when he persuades the fire-bending master Jong to teach Aang. Each time, Roku's manifestation is protective. He appears to save Aang or to help him. He is an ally, a guardian, a wise predecessor looking out for his successor. Kyoshi's manifestation serves a different purpose entirely. She does not appear to protect Aang. She appears to speak her truth, regardless of the consequences to Aang. Her testimony destroys his legal defense. Her confession puts his life in danger, because the villagers now believe the Avatar admitted to murder and want to carry out the punishment. Kyoshi does not care about Aang's trial. She cares about the truth. She cares about the historical record being accurate. Chin was a conqueror. She stopped him. He died. That is what happened. The facts are the facts, and she will not let a mob rewrite them, even to save her own future incarnation. That stubbornness, that absolute refusal to bend the truth for strategic advantage, tells you more about who Kyoshi was than any number of flashbacks could. She is an avatar who valued honesty over self-preservation, justice over diplomacy, action over deliberation. She is everything Aang is not, and she lives inside him. She is part of him. He carries her convictions alongside his own, and the tension between them, her certainty and his doubt, her willingness to use lethal force and his absolute refusal of it. That tension is one of the central engines of the show. The show also uses Kyoshi's legacy to illuminate how the world remembers its avatars. On Kyoshi Island, she is revered. There is a statue. There are warriors who dress in her image and fight with her techniques. Suki, who will become one of the show's most beloved characters, is a Kyoshi warrior. She models her life after an avatar who lived centuries before her. The legacy is active. It shapes people's identities and choices hundreds of years after Kyoshi's death. But in Chin Village, the same avatar is despised. She is remembered as a murderer. The festival that the villagers celebrate, Avatar Day, is a ritual of hatred, a ceremony built around burning effigies of the avatar. The same person, the same actions, the same history, understood in diametrically opposite ways, depending on who is doing the remembering. Kyoshi Island celebrates liberation. Chin Village mourns a conqueror's death. Both perspectives contain truth. Neither is complete. And the show, remarkably for a children's program, does not resolve the tension. It does not tell you which side is right. It lets both perspectives exist, side by side, and moves on. That narrative choice mirrors the show's larger approach to the Avatar mythology. The show does not tell you whether the Avatar is a hero or a necessary evil, whether the cycle is a gift or a curse, whether the past lives are wisdom or burden. It gives you the evidence and lets you decide. That trust in the audience, That refusal to flatten complexity into easy answers is what makes Avatar, The Last Airbender, last in the mind long after the final episode ends. The third window into the Avatar's past opens at the very beginning of Book 2. The Avatar State is the first episode of Book 2, Earth, episode 21 of the overall series. It aired on March 17, 2006, and while the episode's main plot concerns General Fong's dangerous attempt to force Aang into the Avatar State, the episode's most important contribution to the mythology happens in a conversation between Aang and Roku's spirit. After Fong's scheme triggers the Avatar State by burying Katara alive, Roku pulls Aang's spirit into a vision, and in that vision, for the first time, you see the Avatar cycle laid out visually, a long line of figures stretching backward through time, each one glowing with the power of the Avatar State, and among them, you see faces you have not met yet. You see Avatar Kyoshi, earth-bending massive stone structures with terrifying force. You see a waterbender, unnamed in this episode, surfing a colossal wave. That is Avatar Kuruk, though the show does not name him yet. You see an airbender surrounded by swirling winds on a mountaintop. That is Avatar Yangchen, also unnamed, and you see a firebender standing calmly before 4 erupting volcanoes, bending the lava itself into submission. That is Avatar Sito, a name that would not be spoken in any animated episode and would not appear in print until the novel The Shadow of Kyoshi, published years later. The show does not explain who these figures are. It does not need to. What it does, more powerfully, is show you the scale of the thing that lives inside Aang. This is not 2 or 3 past lives. This is an unbroken line stretching back thousands of years, hundreds of avatars, hundreds of lifetimes, and every single one of them is inside this boy. Roku's warning in this scene is the most important piece of information he ever delivers. He tells Aang that the Avatar State is a defense mechanism. It channels the skills and knowledge of every past avatar into the current one, but he also warns that it has a fatal vulnerability. If Aang is killed while in the Avatar State, the reincarnation cycle will be broken. The Avatar will cease to exist. Not just Aang, all of them. Every life in that long chain, every face in that glowing line will be gone. The weight of that revelation cannot be overstated. It means that every time Aang enters the Avatar State, he is risking not just his own life, but the lives of everyone who came before him, and everyone who might come after. He is the custodian of 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom, and if he dies at the wrong moment, all of it vanishes. The responsibility is not metaphorical, it is literal. The chain is real, and he is its weakest link, and the show has made sure you know it. There is a visual grammar to the Avatar State in this episode that the show will maintain consistently for the next 2 seasons. When Aang enters the Avatar State involuntarily, triggered by emotional extremity, his eyes and arrow tattoos glow white. He loses control. He becomes a force of nature, devastating and indiscriminate. General Fong watches Aang tear apart his military fortress in the Avatar State and calls it magnificent, but Fong does not see what the audience sees. He sees a weapon. The audience sees a child in agony, piloting a body that is no longer entirely his, channeling power that could destroy everything around him, including the people he loves. The show uses Fong's perspective as a mirror for a particular kind of mistake. Fong is not evil. He is a military commander who has watched the Fire Nation devastate the Earth Kingdom for 100 years, and he believes that the Avatar State is the tool that will end the war. He is willing to traumatize a 12-year-old to unlock that tool because he has calculated that one child's suffering is a small price for ending a century of suffering. His logic is clean, his ethics are monstrous, and the show presents both of those things without flinching. Fong is the first character in the series to treat the Avatar as a weapon rather than a person. He will not be the last. The idea that the Avatar's power can be separated from the Avatar's judgment, that the devastating force of the Avatar State can be extracted and deployed strategically, that is a recurring temptation throughout the series. And it is always wrong, because the Avatar State is not a weapon. It is a connection. It is the living link between Aang and every person who carried the role before him. Treating it as a military asset is like treating a library as kindling. You can do it. You will lose everything that made it valuable. Roku's explanation of the Avatar State in this episode episode serves as both exposition and warning. He tells Aang that the Avatar state draws on the knowledge and skills of every past life. He shows Aang the long line of avatars, each one demonstrated using the Avatar state in their own era for their own purposes. Kyoshi earthbends with terrifying force. Kuruk rides a massive wave. Yangchen creates a sphere of wind on a mountaintop. Sito bends the lava of 4 erupting volcanoes. Each image is brief, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, but each one tells a complete story. Each shows an avatar at the peak of their power, fully realized, using the combined strength of every life before them to accomplish something that no ordinary bender could. And then Roku shows Aang the cost. The line of avatars vanishes, one by one, figure by figure, starting from the most distant and ending with Roku himself. If Aang dies in the Avatar state, they all go. Not just their power, their memory, their wisdom, their accumulated understanding of what the world is and what it needs. 10,000 years of learning, deleted. The visual is haunting. The glowing figures wink out like candles in a wind, and each disappearance feels like a small death. A life that existed and mattered and is now gone forever. That imagery will return, in reverse, at the very end of the series. In the finale, when Ozai's blow accidentally unlocks Aang's chakra and reconnects him to the Avatar state, the figures reappear one by one, in the reverse order of their disappearance. The cycle is restored, the chain is unbroken, and the visual rhyme between those two moments, the vanishing and the return, separated by more than 40 episodes and 2 years of airtime, is one of the most elegant structural choices in the entire series. It tells you without a word of dialogue that everything Roku warned about was at stake, and that everything has now been recovered. The show holds these visual echoes like a musician holds a note. It does not rush the resonance. It does not explain the connection. It trusts you to feel it. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now, the Avatar state gives you images of these past avatars, but not their stories. The show is, once again, patient. It plants the seeds and waits. The waterbender on the wave, the airbender on the mountain, the firebender before the volcanoes. You see them for seconds, you do not know their names, but the images stay with you, and when the show finally fills in the details, the payoff is enormous. We need to step outside the main series for a moment to talk about something most viewers missed entirely. Between Book 2 and Book 3, while Aang lay unconscious after Azula struck him with lightning in the catacombs of Ba Sing Se, Nickelodeon released a canonical online experience called Escape from the Spirit World. It was an interactive game, but its story content, which was also released as animated online comics, is part of the official canon of the series. And it is in this overlooked piece of extended media that the show finally names and gives backstories to avatars Kuruk and Yangchen. The premise is that Aang is trapped in the spirit world during his coma, and he must reconnect with his previous 4 lives to restore his connection to the Avatar state, which was severed when Azula's lightning struck him. He visits Roku, then Kyoshi, then Kuruk, then Yangchen. Each one tells him something about their life, and each story illuminates a different aspect of what it means to be the Avatar. Roku's story in this context is familiar. He tells Aang about his friendship with Sozin, his failure to stop the war, his death. But Kyoshi's story adds something new. She tells Aang about her greatest regret, which is not the death of Qin the Conqueror, but the creation of the Dai Li. Kyoshi founded the Dai Li as an elite cultural protection force for the Earth Kingdom, intended to preserve the nation's heritage. But as the centuries passed, the Dai Li became something else entirely, a secret police force that manipulated and controlled Ba Sing Se from the shadows. Everything that Long Feng does in Book 2, every lie he tells, every person he silences, exists because Kyoshi created the institution that made it possible. Her best intention became the Earth Kingdom's worst nightmare, and she knows it. That detail is doing more work than it seems. Kyoshi created the Dai Li out of a desire to protect. She used her authority as the Avatar to build an institution that she believed would do good. And it did, for a while. But institutions outlive the people who create them, and the Dai Li outlived Kyoshi by centuries, warping into something she never intended. The show has already shown you the Dai Li at work in Ba Sing Se. You have already watched Long Feng brainwash people with the phrase, "There is no war in Ba Sing Se." Now you learn that the woman who made that possible was the same woman who split a continent to save her village and told a courtroom full of people that she had no regrets. Kyoshi, the decisive warrior, the avatar who acted first and reflected later, built the machine that would one day be used to deny the existence of a century-long war. The gap between intention and consequence has rarely been rendered more clearly in any story, let alone an animated one. Kuruk's story, told for the first time in this interstitial content, introduces a kind of avatar the show has not yet shown you. Kuruk was a water tribe avatar who came after Yangchen, and by his own account, he was a go-with-the-flow kind of avatar. The world was at peace when he inherited it, and he spent his time surfing, challenging other benders to contests of strength, and generally enjoying himself. He did not take the role seriously because there was nothing, as far as he could see, that demanded seriousness. The world was fine. The peace that Yangchen had established was holding. Why intervene in something that was not broken? The answer, of course, is that it was broken. He just could not see it yet. Kuruk's neglect of the spiritual side of his duties angered the spirits, and on the day of his wedding, the spirit Ko the Face Stealer took his fiancée, Ummi, pulling her into the spirit world and stealing her face. It was not random cruelty, it was punishment directed at Kuruk specifically for his failure to maintain the balance between the physical and spiritual worlds. Kuruk spent the rest of his life trying to rescue Ummi, entering the spirit world every year on the anniversary of their wedding and failing every time. He died young at 33, worn down by the spiritual damage of his battles with dark spirits. When Aang encounters Ko in the Book 1 finale, The Siege of the North, the show drops a quiet detail that only pays off if you know Kuruk's story. One of the faces that Ko wears is a woman's, beautiful and serene. That is Ummi. Aang does not know her. You do not know her. Not yet. But the show placed her face on Ko long before it told you who she was, planting a seed that would not bloom for years. The scene between Aang and Ko is one of the most unsettling in the series. Ko is an ancient spirit who inhabits a tree in the spirit world. His body is that of a massive centipede, and his defining characteristic is that he steals faces from those who show emotion in his presence. Aang must speak to Ko to learn the identities of the moon and ocean spirits, and to do so he must maintain a perfectly blank expression. No fear, no anger, no surprise. If he shows anything, Ko will take his face. The tension of the scene comes from the gap between what is happening and what Aang is allowed to show. He is a 12-year-old sitting in the dark with a giant face-stealing centipede spirit, and he must betray no emotion whatsoever. The show holds on his face for an uncomfortably long time. His expression is frozen. His eyes are still. Every time Ko shifts to a new face, trying to provoke a reaction, Aang does not move, and one of those faces is a woman with a serene expression. Ko wears it casually, like a mask, and then moves on. In the moment, it is simply one more disturbing detail in a deeply disturbing scene. But knowing Kuruk's story, knowing that this woman was taken from her wedding by a spirit who wanted to punish her husband for his failures as the avatar, the face becomes something else. It becomes evidence. It becomes the physical remains of a tragedy that happened generations ago, worn as a trophy by the spirit that caused it. Ko did not just steal Ummi's face. He wears it. He uses it. He shows it to the next avatar, who has no idea what he is looking at. That kind of layered storytelling, where a detail dropped in one episode becomes meaningful only when a later piece of information arrives to complete it, is the show's signature technique. The creators built the mythology of the avatar with the knowledge that they would fill it in over time. They placed Ummi's face on Ko in Book 1, knowing that they would tell Kuruk's story later. They showed Sito bending volcanoes in Book 2, knowing that his name and history would not be revealed in the animated series at all. They introduced the Fire Sages as corrupted servants in Book 1, knowing that the corruption of institutions originally built to serve the avatar would become a recurring theme. The mythology was designed from the start to reward revisiting. The show was built to be watched more than once, and each viewing reveals connections that were invisible the first time through. This design philosophy mirrors the avatar cycle itself. Each avatar inherits a world full of details whose significance is not immediately apparent. Roku did not understand when he spared Sozin that he was setting the stage for genocide. Kyoshi did not understand understand when she created the Dai Li that she was founding a secret police state. Kuruk did not understand when he challenged benders to contests of strength on beaches that the spirits were growing angry in the shadows. The meaning of their actions only became clear in retrospect to the avatars who came after and who had to live with the consequences. And that is also true for the viewer. The first time through, Ko's stolen faces are a horror detail. The fire sages are a plot obstacle. The line of glowing avatars in the avatar state is a striking visual, but on a second viewing, with the full mythology in place, every one of those details reveals itself as part of a larger design. The show rewards patience, just as the avatar cycle rewards persistence. Everything connects, everything means something, and the meaning deepens over time. Kuruk's story does something specific within the larger architecture of the avatar mythology. It introduces failure as a defining feature of the role, not catastrophic failure like Roku's inability to stop Sozin. Small failure, ordinary failure, the failure of not paying attention. Kuruk did not do anything terrible. He simply did not do enough. He let the balance slip because the balance seemed fine, and by the time he realized it was not, the cost was personal, devastating, and permanent. The show is telling you, through Kuruk, that the Avatar's greatest danger is not a villain, it is complacency. It is the assumption that peace maintains itself. Consider the rhythm of what Kuruk's story adds to the pattern. By this point in the mythology, you have met an Avatar who was too decisive, Kyoshi, and an Avatar who was not decisive enough, Roku. Kuruk is something different from both. He is an Avatar who did not realize that decisiveness was required. He was born into peace and mistook peace for permanence. He thought the world was finished, settled, resolved by the Avatar before him, and that his job was simply to enjoy the result. He was wrong, and the wrongness cost him everything he loved. That error, the assumption that the work is done, is one of the most common errors in human history. Civilizations decline not because they are attacked, but because they stop maintaining themselves. Relationships end not because of a single betrayal, but because of 1,000 small neglects. And Kuruk, the Avatar who surfed waves and challenged strangers to bending contests while the spirit world rotted around him, is the personification of that principle. He is the Avatar as cautionary tale, not dramatic cautionary tale, not the grand tragedy of a Roku or the moral complexity of a Kyoshi, but the quiet, mundane, deeply relatable tragedy of a person who did not realize what they had until it was taken from them. The show also uses Kuruk to complicate the idea of the Avatar as a public figure. Roku was famous. Kyoshi was legendary. Their stories are told in temples and courtrooms and written on scrolls. But Kuruk's story is private. His greatest battles were fought alone, in the spirit world, against enemies that no one else could see. His fiancée was taken in a place that most people do not even believe exists. His suffering was invisible, and because it was invisible, history remembered him as the Avatar who did nothing, the lazy one, the irresponsible one, the Avatar who surfed while the world needed guidance. The extended lore, explored in the Kyoshi novels years later, would reveal that this reputation was even more unfair than it appeared. Kuruk was not simply negligent, he was fighting dark spirits that were crossing into the physical world as a consequence of Yangchen's broken deals with the spirit realm. Every spirit he fought damaged his own spirit, wearing him down from the inside. He died at 33 not because of laziness, but because of spiritual exhaustion. He was fighting a war that nobody knew about, and his body gave out before he could finish it. But the original series does not give you that context. It gives you Kuruk's own account, filtered through his regret, and it lets that account stand on its own. He was a flawed Avatar. He knows it. He carries that knowledge, and it colours the advice he gives Aang on the lion turtle. When Aang asks Kuruk what he should do about Ozai, Kuruk tells him to act decisively, to actively shape his own destiny, to not make the mistake that Kuruk made, which was to assume that someone else would handle the problem. The advice is born from pain, and you can hear the pain in it if you are listening. And then there is Yangchen, the air nomad Avatar who preceded Kuruk. In the Escape from the Spirit World content, Yangchen explains to Aang why the Avatar is born as a human rather than as an all-powerful spirit. The Avatar must experience human emotions, she says. Sadness, anger, joy, happiness, to understand how precious human life is. If the Avatar were a detached, omniscient spirit, it would have no reason to care about the people it was supposed to protect. The Avatar is human because humanity is the point. That is a quietly radical theological statement buried in a children's online game. The Avatar is not diminished by being human. It is completed by it. The imperfection, the vulnerability, the capacity for error, all of that is not a bug in the system. It is the system. Yangchen is telling Aang, and by extension telling you, that his doubts, his fears, his reluctance to fight, his love for Katara, his grief over the air nomads, all of it makes him a better Avatar, not a worse one. The past lives are there to guide him, but they are not there to overwrite him. He is not supposed to become Roku or Kyoshi or Kuruk. He is supposed to be Aang, fully and completely, and bring everything that Aang is to the role. That insight will become the hinge on which the entire finale turns. But we are not there yet. We are still building. Let us return to the main series and the episode that takes Roku from a wise voice in a sanctuary to a fully realized character with a story that reshapes the entire show. The Avatar and the Fire Lord is the 6th episode of Book 3, Fire, the 46th episode of the overall series. It aired on October 26, 2007, and it is, by any reasonable standard, one of the finest episodes of television ever produced for any audience of any age. The structure is a dual narrative. Roku's spirit visits Aang in a dream and tells him to meet on his island on the summer solstice. Simultaneously, Zuko receives a mysterious scroll telling him to learn about the death of his great-grandfather. The episode then cuts between Aang in the spirit world, watching Roku's life unfold, and Zuko in the Fire Nation catacombs, reading Fire Lord Sozin's testament. What they learn is the same story, told from two perspectives. Roku and Sozin were best friends. They grew up together. They played together. They were the same age, born on the same day. On their shared 16th birthday, the Fire Sages identified Roku as the Avatar, and the two friends were separated. Roku travelled the world to master all 4 elements. He struggled with waterbending. He trained with the masters of each nation. He was away for years, and during those years the friendship with Sozin remained in his heart, a fixed point, something he could return to. The episode takes its time with this. It shows Roku training, failing, improving, mastering. It shows him falling in love with a woman named Ta Min. It shows him returning to the Fire Nation as a fully realised Avatar, greeted by Sozin with warmth and celebration. For a moment the two friends are together again, and everything seems fine. The wedding scene deserves particular attention. Roku and Ta Min are married in the Fire Nation, and Sozin is there. He is the best man, or the Fire Nation equivalent of it. He pulls Roku aside during the celebration, and the two of them stand on a balcony overlooking the capital. The city stretches out below them. The night is warm. The mood is intimate. Two old friends reunited, sharing a private moment at what should be one of the happiest occasions in Roku's life. And then Sozin begins to talk about his vision for the Fire Nation. He describes it as sharing prosperity. He speaks of it with genuine conviction. He believes, or at least he claims to believe, that the Fire Nation has something to offer the world, that extending Fire Nation culture and governance to other lands would improve those lands. The scene is terrifying precisely because Sozin does not sound like a villain. He sounds like a patriot. He sounds like someone who loves his country and wants the world to benefit from what his country has built. The language of imperialism, as the show depicts it, does not begin with conquest. It begins with generosity, with the sincere but catastrophic belief that your way of life is so good that others should be grateful to receive it. Roku hears the subtext that Sozin does not hear in his own words. He refuses, firmly but without hostility, and tells Sozin that the 4 nations must remain separate. The moment passes, the wedding continues, but the seed has been planted, and both men know it, even if neither of them acknowledges it aloud. But Sozin has changed. Or perhaps he has not changed. Perhaps he has simply revealed what was always there. He tells Roku that the Fire Nation's prosperity should be shared with the world. He frames it as generosity, as a gift the Fire Nation can offer to less fortunate nations. But the word he does not use, the word the show withholds until it is too late, is conquest. Sozin is not talking about sharing. He is talking about expansion. He is talking about empire. Roku sees it. He refuses. He tells Sozin, in no uncertain terms, that the 4 nations must remain separate and that the Avatar's duty is to maintain that balance. balance. The scene between them is calm on the surface, but devastating underneath. Two lifelong friends looking at each other across a chasm that neither of them fully understands yet, and choosing different sides of it. Decades pass. The show compresses years into minutes. Roku lives on his island. He raises a family. He is the Avatar, and the world is at peace. And he does not see what is happening until it is almost too late. Sozin has begun colonizing the Earth Kingdom. He has moved from words to action while Roku was living his quiet life. And when Roku finally confronts him, storming into the Fire Nation palace and devastating it with his bending, he does something that will echo through the next 100 years. He spares Sozin. He warns him. He says that their past friendship is the only reason Sozin is still alive. And then he leaves. 25 more years pass. And then Roku's island erupts. Two volcanoes simultaneously pouring lava and ash across everything he has built. Roku fights the eruption with everything he has, bending all four elements against the raw power of the earth itself. And Sozin comes. He arrives on his dragon and helps. For one brief, extraordinary moment, the two old friends are fighting side by side again, trying to save Roku's home, and then Sozin stops helping. He looks at Roku, struggling, weakened, surrounded by toxic gas and molten rock, and he makes a choice. He walks away. He leaves Roku to die, knowing that with the Avatar gone, nothing will stand in the way of his plans for the Fire Nation. Roku reaches out to his old friend as the fumes take him. Sozin does not look back. The moment is quiet. The show does not score it with dramatic music. It does not give Roku a heroic last word. It just shows a man dying alone because his best friend chose power over love. And then Roku's dragon, Fang, curls around his body and dies with him, and the volcano buries them both. That image of the dragon wrapping itself around the fallen Avatar is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the series. The show holds on it. It does not cut away. Fang, Roku's animal companion, the dragon he has ridden across the world and through decades of life, chooses to die with him rather than fly to safety. The loyalty is total, and the betrayal that made it necessary, Sozin walking away, is made worse by the contrast. The dragon, an animal, shows a faithfulness that Sozin, a man, could not. There is an important structural choice in how this episode handles time. The story of Roku and Sozin spans approximately 70 years. The episode covers those 70 years in 22 minutes, and the way it chooses which moments to show and which to skip is itself a form of analysis. The show gives you Roku and Sozin as boys. It gives you the moment of separation when Roku is identified as the Avatar. It gives you Roku's training. It gives you his return. It gives you the wedding. It gives you the conversation where Sozin reveals his true ambitions. It gives you the confrontation at the palace, and it gives you the volcano. What it does not give you is everything in between, the years of silence. The decades when Roku lived his life on his island, and Sozin moved forward with his plans, slowly, carefully, without opposition. Those decades are the most important part of the story, and the show tells them through absence. You understand that Roku did not know what Sozin was doing. You understand that Roku trusted his warning to be sufficient, that the confrontation at the palace, devastating as it was, would be the end of it. And you understand that this trust was misplaced, not because Roku was naive, but because he was human. He loved Sozin. He did not want to believe that his friend was beyond redemption, and so he gave him space, gave him time, gave him exactly what a conqueror needs to build an empire. The emotional precision of this episode was recognized by the writers themselves. DiMartino and Konietzko noted in the DVD commentary that this episode had, by far, the most background designs of any episode in the series. The scope of the story demanded it. You are seeing the Fire Nation capital across decades. You are seeing Roku's island at different stages of his life. You are seeing training grounds in all four nations. The art department built an entire lifetime's worth of settings in a single episode. The investment of craft tells you how important the creators considered this story to be. The episode was written by Elizabeth Welch and directed by Ethan Spalding. It aired first in the United Kingdom on October 24th, 2007, 2 days before its American premiere on Nickelodeon on October 26th, 2007. The early international release is a small fact, but it speaks to the episode's importance in the season's structure. The network knew this was a significant episode and treated it accordingly. One of the most discussed aspects of The Avatar and the Fire Lord is its handling of moral complexity in a format ostensibly aimed at children. The episode does not tell you that Sozin is evil. It shows you a man who begins with genuine affection for his best friend, who holds genuine beliefs about the Fire Nation's potential to improve the world, and who makes a series of choices that lead, with terrible inevitability, to genocide. Sozin is not a monster. He is a nationalist. He believes in his country's superiority. He believes that spreading Fire Nation culture is a gift, not an imposition. And when the one person with the power and authority to tell him he is wrong delivers that message and then walks away, Sozin is left alone with his convictions and the power to act on them. The show treats this as tragedy, not villainy. Not because it excuses Sozin's actions, which it very clearly does not, but because it understands that the most dangerous people are not the ones who believe they are doing evil. They are the ones who believe they are doing good. Sozin believed, and his belief, unchecked by the one relationship that might have moderated it, became the engine of a century-long war. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What makes this episode extraordinary is not the tragedy of Roku's death. Although that tragedy is profound, it is the structural mirror, because Zuko is reading Sozin's testament at the same time and learning the same events from the other side. And the episode makes him and you understand something that changes everything. Zuko goes to Iroh in prison and asks what the scroll means. Why did someone send him a message about his great-grandfather's death? And Iroh tells him the truth. Sozin is Zuko's great-grandfather on his father's side, but Roku is Zuko's great-grandfather on his mother's side. Zuko is descended from both the Avatar and the man who killed him. Both lineages live inside him. The war that tore the world apart began with the betrayal of a friendship, and the boy who carries both sides of that betrayal in his blood is the one who will have to decide which legacy to honor. The show has been building toward this moment for 46 episodes. Zuko's internal conflict, his rage and his goodness, his cruelty and his compassion, everything that has made him the most complicated character in the series, is revealed in this single episode to be not just personal, but ancestral. He is not choosing between good and evil. He is choosing between Roku and Sozin. And that choice is the same choice the show has been asking about from the very beginning. What does the Avatar's legacy mean? What does it cost? And who inherits the consequences? Roku's story does something else within the mythology that is easy to miss. It establishes that the Avatar can fail not through weakness, but through mercy. Roku was not a weak Avatar. He was a fully realized master of all four elements. He defeated Sozin in combat. He could have killed him, could have ended the threat before it became a war, but he chose not to because Sozin was his friend, and because Roku believed that the warning would be enough. He was wrong. His mercy became the 100-Year War. His compassion became the genocide of the air nomads. Think about what the show is doing with that. It is taking the quality that most stories celebrate, the hero's willingness to spare an enemy, and showing you the cost of it. Roku's story is not a parable about weakness. It is a parable about the limits of mercy when the person receiving it has no intention of deserving it. And it is a direct, deliberate parallel to the choice Aang will face in the finale. Kill Ozai or show mercy. Roku showed mercy to Sozin and the world burned. What will happen if Aang shows mercy to Ozai? The show does not answer that question cheaply. It does not let Aang ignore the parallel. In the finale, when Aang consults his past lives on the lion turtle, Roku tells him directly. He tells Aang that he was indecisive when he should have been decisive, and that his failure to act against Sozin allowed the war to begin. Roku, the avatar who spared his friend, tells Aang that the lesson of his life is that hesitation has consequences. Be decisive, Roku says. Do not repeat my mistake. That advice is Roku's final gift, and it is a painful one, because Aang hears it and understands it and still does not accept it. He will find another way. He will use energy bending, a technique taught to him by the lion turtle, to strip Ozai of his power without taking his life. And in doing so, he will prove that Roku's story, while true, is not the only truth. Mercy can fail as it did with Sozin, but that does not mean mercy is always wrong. It means the person extending it must be strong enough to enforce it. Aang does not simply spare Ozai. He defeats him so completely, so utterly, that mercy becomes the greater demonstration of power. Roku could not do that with Sozin. He warned and left. Aang pins Ozai to the ground, bends his energy, and removes his ability to ever threaten anyone again. The mercy is total, and so is the victory, but Aang does not reach that solution alone. He reaches it through the accumulated weight of every avatar's story, every lesson, every failure. And each of those stories matters because each one shows a different version of the same fundamental problem. How do you use power responsibly when the stakes are the entire world? Let us talk about Avatar Sito, the firebender, standing before the 4 volcanoes. Of all the avatars glimpsed in the original series, Sito receives the least attention. He appears only as a brief image in the Avatar State lineup in Book 2, Episode 1. You see a man in formal Fire Nation robes, his eyes glowing, his hands raised, bending the lava of 4 simultaneous volcanic eruptions into obedience. The image is striking but unexplained. The show gives you no name, no context, no story, just the picture. What is known of Sito comes primarily from outside the animated series, from the novel The Shadow of Kyoshi, where his story is told in passing. Sito was a Fire Nation avatar who lived 5 lifetimes before Aang, born in a period of internal strife. Natural disasters were ravaging the Fire Nation. The noble clans were on the verge of civil war, and Sito, rather than traveling the world to maintain global balance as most avatars did, chose instead to serve his own nation from within its bureaucracy. He became a diplomat, an accountant, an administrator. He worked his way through the Fire Nation's governmental structure until he became Grand Advisor to Fire Lord Yosor. He used his administrative position, not his bending, to stabilize the country. He restructured the economy. He brokered peace between the warring clans. He used his avatar powers only when necessary, and when he did, it was for things like stopping volcanic eruptions, the kind of natural disaster response that required the power of a fully realized avatar and nothing else. Sito is an anomaly in the avatar cycle. He is the avatar who decided that the best way to fulfill his duty was to sit behind a desk. The show never explains this. It does not need to. The image of a man in bureaucratic robes calmly bending 4 volcanoes tells you everything. This is a person who used his power in the service of governance, not adventure. He saved the Fire Nation, not by fighting its enemies, but by balancing its books. The implication is fascinating and slightly troubling. Sito focused almost entirely on the Fire Nation. He neglected the other 3 nations. His attention to his home country, while effective, left imbalances elsewhere that his successor would have to deal with. That successor was Yangchen, and Yangchen would spend her entire life cleaning up the mess that Sito's single-minded focus created. The pattern is becoming clear. Every avatar inherits the consequences of the one before. Sito's nationalism begets Yangchen's globalism. Yangchen's deal-making with spirits begets the spiritual crisis that destroys Kuruk. Kuruk's neglect begets the chaos that Kyoshi must contain with force. Kyoshi's institutions beget the corruption that enables the war. Roku's mercy begets the war itself, and the war begets Aang, who inherits all of it, every mistake, every overcorrection, every unintended consequence, and must find a way through that none of his predecessors found. That is not a cycle of heroes. That is a cycle of well-intentioned people doing their best with incomplete information and leaving behind a world slightly worse in some way that they could not foresee. The Avatar is not a savior. The Avatar is a problem solver. solver, who, in the act of solving one problem, creates the conditions for the next. The show never states this explicitly, but the pattern is unmistakable once you see it, and the Avatar state is the episode that gives you the first visual evidence that this chain stretches back further than you imagined. There is a quietly brilliant structural choice in how the show distributes its Avatar mythology across the 3 seasons. Book 1 gives you Roku, one past life clearly defined, with a direct relationship to the plot. The information is focused and accessible. You learn about the comet, about Roku's power, about the concept of manifestation through Aang. This is all you need for Book 1. The mythology serves the story, and the story is Aang's journey to the North Pole to find a water-bending master. Book 2 expands the field. You get the lineup of avatars in the Avatar state. You get Kyoshi's confession in Avatar Day. You get the escape from the spirit world. Interstitial content between Books 2 and 3, which names Kuruk and Yangchen for the first time. The mythology deepens without overwhelming the narrative. You are learning that the Avatar cycle is larger, more complex, and more fraught than you initially understood, but each new piece of information is tied to a specific narrative purpose. The lineup shows you the vulnerability of the Avatar state. Kyoshi's confession forces Aang to reckon with the moral complexity of his role. Kuruk and Yangchen stories, delivered outside the main episodes, add texture and depth for viewers who seek it out. Book 3 brings it home. The Avatar and the Fire Lord delivers the definitive Roku episode, the one that transforms him from a wise mentor into a tragic figure, and the finale deploys every past life simultaneously, stacking their advice against Aang's convictions and letting the collision produce the show's answer to its central question. The mythology is not decorative. It is structural. It carries the weight of the show's themes in the same way that the physical architecture of a building carries the weight of the floors above it. Remove the past lives, and the finale does not work. The confrontation between Aang and Ozai becomes a simple fight, hero versus villain, and the energy-bending solution becomes a deus ex machina with no thematic grounding. But with the past lives in place, energy bending becomes the culmination of a 3-season argument about the relationship between power, responsibility, and identity. The show also uses the Avatar mythology to deepen its secondary characters in ways that are easy to miss on first viewing. Consider Iroh. Iroh is in many ways the show's wisest character. He is patient, compassionate, funny, humble. He is also a former general who once laid siege to Ba Sing Se for 600 days, and whose son, Lu Ten, died in the fighting. Iroh's wisdom is not innate, it is earned. It comes from loss, from reflection, from the hard work of becoming a better person than he was. In The Avatar and the Fire Lord, you learn that Iroh knew the truth about Zuko's ancestry. He knew that Zuko was descended from both Roku and Suzine, and he chose to give Zuko the Crown Prince headpiece that Suzine once gifted to Roku, a piece of jewelry that bridges the gap between the Avatar and the Fire Lord, between peace and war, between love and betrayal. That gesture is Iroh's version of the Avatar mythology. He is not the Avatar. He cannot channel past lives or bend all 4 elements. But he understands the principle that the Avatar embodies, the principle that every person carries within them the capacity for both great good and great evil, and that the choice between them is made daily in 1,000 small decisions across the span of a life. Iroh tells Zuko that he must choose. He must decide which great-grandfather to honour, and that choice, offered by a man who knows better than anyone what it costs to choose wrongly and then choose again, is one of the most powerful moments in the series. Iroh is not the Avatar, but he carries a version of the Avatar's burden. He has seen his own failures. He has lost his son. He has watched his brother and his niece descend into cruelty and madness, and he has chosen, despite all of it, to remain kind, to remain hopeful, to remain the man who pours tea for strangers and plays pie show with old friends and believes, against all evidence, that his nephew can be redeemed. Iroh's faith in Zuko mirrors the Avatar mythology's faith in the cycle itself. The cycle does not guarantee success. It guarantees opportunity, another chance, another life, another attempt at getting getting it right, and Iroh offers Zuko the same thing. Not a guarantee that he will become a good person, just the opportunity, just the door. Zuko has to walk through it himself. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Yangchen is in many ways the avatar who haunts the show most deeply without ever appearing in it directly. Within the animated series itself, she is visible only twice. The first time is in that lineup of past avatars in the Avatar state, where she appears as an airbending figure wreathed in wind. The second time is in the finale, Sozin's Comet, Part 2, The Old Masters, when Aang consults her on the lion turtle. That second appearance is brief but devastating. Aang has already spoken to Roku, Kyoshi, and Kuruk in reverse order of the Avatar cycle: fire, earth, water. Each has told him in different ways to kill Ozai. Roku told him to be decisive. Kyoshi told him that only justice would bring peace, and that she saw no difference between letting someone die and killing them outright. Kuruk told him to take action against his enemies while he still could, before it was too late. 3 avatars, 3 variations on the same answer. End Ozai, and then Aang reaches Yangchen, an air nomad like him, the one past life he expects to understand his position, to share his values, to tell him there is another way. Because she was raised in the same tradition of non-violence, she was taught the same respect for all life. She should, of all of them, be the one who says that killing is wrong. She does not say that. Yangchen tells Aang that the Avatar can never detach from the world. She tells him that the air nomad's philosophy of peace is beautiful, but that the Avatar cannot follow it completely, because the Avatar's duty is to the world, not to any single philosophy. She tells him that many Avatars before him have come to her, seeking a way to serve the world without getting their hands dirty, and that she has had to tell each of them the same thing. Selfless duty calls for sacrifice, she says. Your own spiritual needs must come second. Yangchen, the air nomad, the pacifist, the monk, tells Aang to do what must be done, even if it costs him his spiritual purity, even if it goes against everything his people believed, because the Avatar serves the world, not the self, and the world needs Ozai stopped. That moment is the culmination of everything the show has been building across the mythology of the past avatars. It is the moment where the show stacks every voice, every perspective, every lifetime of experience against Aang's deepest conviction, and says, they all disagree with you. Every one of them. Even the one who should be on your side, and you have to decide what to do with that. The power of the show's solution, energy bending, is that it honours both sides of the argument. Aang does not kill Ozai. He does not compromise his core identity as an air nomad, but he also does not ignore the advice of his past lives. He takes their urgency, their insistence that Ozai must be stopped completely, and finds a way to stop Ozai completely without killing him. He threads a needle that none of his past lives could see, because none of them were him. They had their own values, their own methods, their own blind spots. Yangchen was right that duty requires sacrifice, but the sacrifice Aang makes is not his values. The sacrifice is certainty. He walks into the final battle without knowing if the lion turtle's technique will work, without knowing if he has the spiritual strength to use it without being destroyed, and he risks everything on the chance that there is a path his predecessors never found. That is the payoff of the Avatar mythology. Not that the past lives give Aang the answer, but that they give him the framework to find an answer that none of them imagined. The 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom, the long chain of Sito's pragmatism, and Yangchen's duty, and Kuruk's regret, and Kyoshi's resolve, and Roku's hard-won knowledge of what mercy costs, all of it flows into Aang in that final battle, and he does something new with it. He becomes the first Avatar in 10,000 years to defeat his enemy without killing or being killed. He breaks the pattern. There is a detail about the ordering of the past lives' advice that deserves attention. Aang consults them in reverse order of the Avatar cycle. Roku, fire; Kyoshi, earth; Kuruk, water, Yangchen, air. That reverse ordering is deliberate. It starts with the most recent avatar and works backward, saving the air nomad for last. The show is building toward Yangchen specifically because she is the trap. She is the avatar that Aang assumes will agree with him, and the entire emotional weight of the scene depends on her not agreeing. The scene on the lion turtle, where Aang meditates and calls forth each past life, has a specific visual language. Each avatar appears in an environment that reflects their nature. Roku appears amid volcanic rock and fire. Kyoshi appears on a windswept cliff. Kuruk appears near water. Yangchen appears on a mountain peak surrounded by clouds. The environments are not random. They are spiritual landscapes that externalize each avatar's essence, and Aang moves through them one by one, like a pilgrim visiting shrines, seeking the answer that will allow him to face Ozai without compromising who he is. Roku tells him to be decisive, and that his hesitation was the mistake that started the war. Kyoshi tells him that only justice brings peace, and that she views the death of Chin as a justified consequence of standing against a tyrant. Kuruk tells him to act before the chance is lost, to shape his destiny actively rather than letting it shape him. 3 voices, 3 forms of the same advice. End Ozai. Each of these pieces of advice carries the specific weight of the avatar who gives it. Roku's advice comes from personal failure, the pain of a man who showed mercy to a friend and watched that friend destroy the world. Kyoshi's advice comes from a place of moral certainty, the clarity of a woman who confronted evil and did not flinch. Kuruk's advice comes from regret, the hindsight of a man who waited too long and paid for it with his soul. None of them is wrong. All of them are speaking from genuine experience. And yet none of them gives Aang what he needs, because what he needs is not their experience. It is his own. And then Yangchen speaks, and the scene shifts. The visual language softens. The clouds around the mountaintop are gentle. The light is warm. Yangchen is calm, maternal, wise. She looks like the kind of person who would understand a young monk's reluctance to take a life. Everything about the scene is designed to make you believe, for one hopeful moment, that she will give Aang the answer he wants. She does not. She tells him that the avatar can never detach from the world, that the air nomad philosophy of spiritual purity is a luxury the avatar cannot afford, that many avatars have sought the same escape Aang is seeking, a way to serve without sacrifice, and that none of them found it. She tells him that selfless duty calls for sacrifice, and that his own spiritual needs must come second to the needs of the world. The show does not score this moment with dramatic music. There is no swelling orchestra. Yangchen speaks quietly, with compassion, with understanding, and with absolute finality. She is not harsh, she is honest, and her honesty is worse than harshness because it comes from someone who lived the same life Aang is living, who was raised in the same tradition, who valued the same things, and who came to the conclusion that those values, however beautiful, cannot be the avatar's first priority. The silence after Yangchen finishes speaking is one of the longest silences in the series. Aang sits with it. The show holds on his face. He has asked every voice in the chain, and every voice has told him the same thing in different words. There is no escape. There is no loophole. The weight of 10,000 years of experience says, kill Ozai, and Aang rejects it, quietly, without argument, without dramatic speech. He simply does not accept the answer. He turns to the lion turtle, the ancient being whose island he's been sleeping on, and asks for another way, and the lion turtle gives him one. The lion turtle's gift of energy bending is often discussed as a deus ex machina, an 11th hour solution that arrives conveniently to resolve an impossible dilemma. And there is a version of the criticism that has merit. The technique comes from outside the established magic system of the show. It appears in the penultimate episode and is used in the final one. It does, in a narrative sense, arrive late, but the criticism misses what the technique means within the mythology of the avatar. Energy bending is not new, it is old. It is the oldest form of bending in the world, predating all 4 elemental disciplines. The lion turtle's turtles used it to grant the first humans the power to bend the elements, long before the Avatar existed. Energy bending is the source from which all other bending flows. And by giving Aang access to it, the lion turtle is not introducing a new power. It is returning him to the origin. It is giving him the tool that preceded the Avatar cycle itself, the power that created bending, the power that was there before One, before Ra'ava, before the Four Nations, before all of it. In that context, energy bending is not a convenient solution. It is the most ancient solution. It is the answer that was always there, buried beneath 10,000 years of accumulated tradition, waiting for an Avatar who was willing to look past the advice of every predecessor to find it. Aang does not reject the past lives. He goes deeper than them. He reaches past the entire Avatar cycle to the thing that made the cycle possible, and in doing so, he proves that the Avatar is more than the sum of past lives. The Avatar is always the person holding the title right now, with all their limitations and all their unique perspective, and that perspective can reveal solutions that millennia of accumulated wisdom missed. Let us now return to a question the show asks without ever speaking it aloud. What made the Avatar in the first place? The original series never answers this. It treats the Avatar as a given, a fixed feature of the world, a role that has always existed, but the broader franchise, particularly The Legend of Korra, answers it definitively, and that answer deepens everything the original series accomplishes. Avatar 1, the first. His story is told in the two-part episode Beginnings in Book 2 of The Legend of Korra, which aired on October 18th, 2013. It is in some ways the most important Avatar story ever told, because it reveals what the Avatar actually is, not as a title or a duty, but as a fusion between human and spirit. Before we discuss the content of One's story, it is worth pausing to consider its placement in the franchise. One's origin is not told in Avatar, The Last Airbender. It comes 5 years after the original series ended in its sequel. The original series treats the Avatar as a given. It never explains where the Avatar came from, how the cycle started, or why the Avatar exists at all. Roku and Kyoshi and Kuruk and Yangchen all appear as links in a chain whose beginning is never shown. The chain simply exists, stretching back into the unknowable past, and the show asks you to accept it on faith. That choice was deliberate and correct. The original series is Aang's story, and Aang does not need to understand the origin of the Avatar to fulfill his role. He needs to understand his past lives, their mistakes and their wisdom, but he does not need to understand the metaphysics of the cycle itself. The show gives him, and you, exactly enough mythology to serve the story it is telling, no more. But The Legend of Korra has a different protagonist with different needs, and Korra's story requires the origin, and when that origin finally arrives, it changes the way you understand everything that came before. In the time before the Avatar, approximately 10,000 years before the events of the original series, humans lived on the backs of giant lion turtles. The lion turtles protected them from the spirit wilds, a dangerous world filled with spirits that humans could not coexist with. When humans ventured out, the lion turtles would grant them the temporary ability to bend an element, a protection they would return when they came back. One was a young man from a fire lion turtle city. He was poor, a thief, someone who stole food from the wealthy to feed his friends. He was banished from his city and forced to survive in the spirit wilds alone. And in the wilds, he did something no human had done before. He learned to live alongside spirits. He adapted. He gained their trust. He became, in the most literal sense, a bridge between worlds. The visual style of the Beginnings episodes is different from anything else in the franchise. The animation is rendered in a style inspired by traditional East Asian scroll painting, with warm earth tones, visible brushstrokes, and a sense of light and depth that evokes classical art more than modern animation. The choice is not decorative. It signals that you are in a different era, a different world, a time so distant from the present that even the visual language of the story must change to accommodate it. The lion turtle cities, with their massive stone backs rising above the spirit wilds, look like something from a myth because they are. By Aang's time, lion turtles are virtually extinct, and the world they supported has been forgotten. One's personality is also deliberate. He is brash, impulsive, generous, and quick to act without thinking. He is in many ways a prototype for Aang. everything. Both are young men who care about the people around them. Both act on instinct. Both make mistakes that have enormous consequences. But where Aang runs from his destiny, one charges toward it. Where Aang's defining quality is reluctance, one's is eagerness. He wants to help, he wants to fix things, he wants to make the world better, and his eagerness, untempered by wisdom, is what releases Vaatu and nearly destroys everything. And then he made a mistake. He encountered two spirits locked in eternal combat, Ra'ava, the spirit of light and peace, and Vaatu, the spirit of darkness and chaos. Mistaking Ra'ava for the aggressor, one intervened and separated them, freeing Vaatu. The balance between light and dark, which Ra'ava had been maintaining for millennia, was shattered, and the world began to fall apart. One spent years trying to fix what he had broken. He travelled from lion turtle to lion turtle, learning each element, becoming the first human to hold the power of all four. He trained. He grew stronger, but he was still just a man with borrowed power. He could not defeat Vaatu alone, and so, at the moment of harmonic convergence, when the planets aligned and the spirit portals merged, one did the only thing he could. He fused with Rava permanently. Their spirits became one. Human and spirit, mortality and eternity, choice and power, bound together forever. The fusion worked. One defeated Vaatu and imprisoned him. He sealed the spirit portals separating the human and spirit worlds, and he spent the rest of his life trying to bring peace to a world that had been torn apart by the very conflict he had accidentally started. He failed. He grew old. He fought wars, and on his deathbed, lying on a battlefield, surrounded by the evidence of his failure, he apologized to Rava for not being able to bring peace, and Rava told him not to worry. They would be together for all of his lifetimes, and the cycle began. That origin story recontextualizes everything in the original series. The Avatar is not a chosen one in the traditional sense. The Avatar is the product of a mistake. One freed Vaatu because he acted impulsively, without understanding the situation, and the entire Avatar cycle exists because one person tried to fix the consequences of his own error. The 10,000 years of Avatars that follow, Sito and Yangchen and Kuruk and Kyoshi and Roku and Aang, all of them exist because one young man in the distant past made a well-intentioned but catastrophic decision and then fused his soul with a spirit to try to clean up the mess. That reframing is extraordinary. The Avatar is not a gift, it is a debt. Every Avatar is born owing the world something because the institution of the Avatar itself was created out of necessity, not design. One did not ask to become the Avatar. He did not seek power, he was trying to right a wrong. And the cost of righting that wrong was everything. His freedom, his mortality, his identity. He gave himself to Rava knowing that the fusion would persist beyond his death, that he would be reborn again and again, that his spirit would never rest. And every Avatar since has inherited that gift and that burden, the gift of power, the burden of responsibility that can never be put down, because it was never picked up voluntarily. It was born from crisis and has been sustained by crisis ever since. Sito, governing a nation to prevent its collapse. Yangchen, brokering impossible deals between humans and spirits. Kuruk, fighting dark spirits alone in a world that did not know what he was sacrificing. Kyoshi, using force to maintain an order that was always on the verge of falling apart. Roku, watching his best friend become a tyrant and being unable to stop him without destroying everything he loved. And Aang, the boy in the iceberg, who ran away from all of it and then came back to face it because there was nobody else. One's deathbed scene, though it belongs to Korra's series, illuminates something about the original that the original never quite articulates. One lies on a battlefield, old and exhausted, surrounded by the wreckage of yet another war he could not prevent. He apologizes to Rava. He says he was unable to bring peace. He tried for his entire life, and the world is still broken. And Rava tells him gently not to worry. They will be together through all of his lifetimes, she will always be with him. There is an ambiguity in that promise that the franchise never fully resolves, and it is a productive ambiguity. Rava is telling Wan that he will never be done. He will die and be reborn and try again, and die and be reborn and try again. For as long as the world needs an avatar, there is no retirement, there is no graduation. There is only the cycle, turning and turning. Each life a new attempt at a task that may be fundamentally impossible. And every avatar since Wan has lived inside that promise. They do not all know it consciously. The knowledge of Wan faded over the millennia, turning into myth and then into forgotten history. By Aang's time, nobody knows who the first avatar was or how the cycle began, but the reality of it persists in the structure of their lives. Every avatar is born into a world with problems they did not create. Every avatar spends their life trying to solve those problems. Every avatar fails to solve all of them, and every avatar dies knowing that someone else will be born to continue the work. The work never ends. The debt is never repaid. That understanding casts a particular light on the original series. When you watch Aang struggle with the weight of being the avatar, when you watch him run away from the air temple and freeze himself in an iceberg because the burden is too great, you are watching a 12-year-old grapple with a responsibility that has existed for 10,000 years and that will exist for 10,000 more. His reluctance is not weakness. It is the appropriate response to an impossible situation. The only inappropriate response would be to accept it casually, to treat the role as routine, to forget what it costs. Kuruk forgot, and the cost consumed him. The connection between Wan and Aang is deeper than simple reincarnation. Both are young when they take on the role. Both act from instinct before they act from wisdom. Both make catastrophic mistakes born from good intentions. Wan freed Vaatu because he believed he was rescuing a prisoner. Aang ran away because he was afraid of losing the only life he knew. Both decisions had consequences that echoed for centuries, and both characters spend their remaining years trying to repair the damage, not out of guilt alone, but out of a genuine belief that repair is possible. That optimism, stubborn and irrational and beautiful, is the thread that connects every avatar in the cycle. From Wan's apology on the battlefield to Aang's refusal to kill Ozai, the defining characteristic of the avatar is not power, it is hope. The belief, held against all evidence, that the next attempt will be the one that works, that this life will be the life that finally brings lasting peace. None of them have been right yet. All of them have tried, and the trying, across 10,000 years, has kept the world from falling apart completely. Not because the avatar always succeeds, but because the avatar always shows up. That showing up, that refusal to let the world fend for itself, is the avatar's true contribution to history. Not the bending, not the power, the persistence. There is a scene in Book 1 that nobody remembers as an avatar mythology scene, but that, in retrospect, is one of the most important ones. In The Storm, Book 1, Episode 12, which aired on June 3rd, 2005, Aang tells Katara the story of how he learned he was the avatar. The monks at the Southern Air Temple told him when he was 12, earlier than avatars are traditionally informed, because the threat of war made the information urgent. And when they told him, everything changed. The other children stopped playing with him. The monks discussed sending him away from Gyatso, his only real friend and father figure. Aang's entire world contracted to a single, terrible reality. He was different. He would always be different, and the people who loved him could not protect him from what that difference demanded. So he ran. He took Appa and flew into a storm, and the storm pulled them underwater, and Aang entered the avatar state unconsciously, freezing himself and Appa in an iceberg. He was 12 years old. He was terrified, and the avatar state, the defense mechanism that Roku would later describe, activated to save his life. It locked him in ice for 100 years while the world burned. That scene is the emotional foundation of the entire series. Everything that follows, every battle, every friendship, every lesson lesson from every past life grows from the soil of a scared child running away from home, and the show never lets you forget it. Aang's guilt over his absence, over the 100 years he spent frozen while the air nomads were massacred and the Fire Nation conquered the world, is the weight that shapes every decision he makes. He does not fight Ozai because he wants glory or because he craves power. He fights Ozai because he was not there to fight Sozin, because his absence made the war possible, because the 100-year gap in the Avatar cycle is, in the most literal sense, his fault. Except it is not his fault. He was 12. He was afraid. And the show holds both of those truths simultaneously, the guilt and the innocence, the responsibility and the impossibility, without ever resolving the tension between them. Aang blames himself. The show does not. That gap between the character's self-judgment and the show's judgment of the character is where the real emotional depth lives. Aang thinks he failed the world by running away. The show thinks the world failed him by placing an impossible burden on a child. Both readings are valid. Neither is complete. And the interplay between them gives the series a moral texture that most adult dramas cannot match. This brings us back to the mythology of the past lives, because the past lives, all of them, were also children once. One was a teenager when he stole fire from the lion turtle. Kyoshi was 16 when she was identified as the Avatar and thrown into a world of violence and political intrigue. Roku was 16 when the Fire Sages separated him from his best friend and his home. Every Avatar begins as a young person confronting an impossible responsibility, and every Avatar's story is, in part, the story of how they grew into the weight. Some of them grew well. Yangchen became the most beloved Avatar in history, a woman whose name was still invoked in prayers centuries after her death. Some of them grew crooked. Kuruk grew bitter and hollow and died young. Some of them grew strong and left scars. Kyoshi created institutions that outlived their purpose and became instruments of oppression, and some of them grew wise too late. Roku understood Sozin's true nature only after decades of denial, and by then the window for action had closed. Aang is the latest in this line, and the show gives him something none of his predecessors had. It gives him friends, not just allies or mentors or advisors, but friends. Katara, Sokka, Toph, Zuko in the end. People who see him as Aang first and the Avatar second. People who love him not because of what he can do, but because of who he is. And that friendship, that ordinary human connection, turns out to be the thing that makes him different from every Avatar who came before. None of the past Avatars, as the show depicts them, had what Aang has. Roku had Sozin, but that friendship was destroyed by ambition. Kyoshi had companions, but her life was defined by isolation and duty. Kuruk had his fiancée, but she was taken from him. Yangchen served the world so completely that there is no record of who she loved, only of who she helped. The past Avatars are depicted as essentially alone in their roles, bearing the weight by themselves, making decisions without the grounding influence of genuine, equal friendship. Aang is not alone, and because he is not alone, he can do something none of his predecessors could. He can hear their advice, understand their reasoning, respect their experience, and still say no. He can reject the consensus of 10,000 years because he has something they did not have. He has people around him who believe in him, not in the Avatar, but in the boy. Katara does not love the Avatar. She loves Aang. Sokka does not follow the Avatar. He follows his friend. Toph does not train the Avatar. She trains the kid who could not earthbend because he was too afraid to stand his ground. And Zuko does not join the Avatar. He joins the person who showed him that redemption was possible. The past lives tell Aang to kill Ozai. His friends never do. Not once. Not in any episode. They worry about the battle. They prepare for it. They accept that it must happen. But none of them tell Aang to take a life. And in the space between the past lives' advice and his friend's silence, Aang finds the answer that energy bending represents, not the wisdom of the dead, not the expectations of the living, something in between, something uniquely his. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a sequence in Sozin's Comet, Part 4, Avatar Aang, the final episode of the entire series, series that brings the mythology of the Avatar full circle. It is the moment when Ozai accidentally unlocks Aang's 7th chakra. During their battle, empowered by the comet's fire, Ozai slams Aang into a jagged rock. The impact strikes the scar on Aang's back, the wound left by Azula's lightning in the Book 2 finale, and the force of the blow unlocks the chakra that Azula had sealed shut. The Avatar state activates, and for the first time, it activates fully. The show depicts this as the return of the line. Remember the long row of glowing figures from the Avatar state, the chain stretching back through history. In the Book 2 premiere, Roku showed Aang that chain, and then the figures disappeared one by one, a visual representation of the vulnerability Roku warned about. If Aang dies in the Avatar state, the chain ends. Now in the finale, the chain returns. The figures reappear in the reverse order of their disappearance. The cycle is restored, the connection is complete, and Aang rises into the air with the power of every Avatar who ever lived flowing through him. The battle that follows is not a fair fight. It is not supposed to be. Aang in the Avatar state, fully connected to 10,000 years of accumulated power, is not fighting Ozai. He is overwhelming him. The fire that Sozin's comet grants to Ozai is nothing compared to the combined force of every firebender, every waterbender, every earthbender, every airbender who ever held the title of Avatar. Aang bends all 4 elements simultaneously, creating an elemental sphere around himself, a technique that the show has hinted is the oldest Avatar technique in existence. He raises the ocean, he compresses stone, he commands fire and wind. Ozai, the most powerful firebender alive, is reduced to running. The show holds on Aang's face in this moment. His eyes are white, his arrows are glowing, his expression is not his own. He is not Aang anymore. He is the Avatar, the whole Avatar, every life at once, and the weight of all those lives is directed at the man who ordered the genocide of the air nomads, and who is now trying to burn the Earth Kingdom to the ground. It would be easy in this moment to kill Ozai. It would be justified. Every past life that Aang consulted told him so. The power is there, the opportunity is there, and for one terrifying second, it looks like Aang is going to do it. He raises his hand, the elements converge, the killing blow is ready, and then he stops. He pulls out of the Avatar state. His eyes return to normal. He is Aang again, not the Avatar, not the weapon, not the chain, just a 12-year-old boy who does not want to kill anyone. And he finds another way. The energy-bending sequence that follows is the most spiritually significant moment in the entire series. Aang places one hand on Ozai's forehead and one on his chest. He bends Ozai's inner energy, attempting to remove his fire-bending permanently. The show visualizes this as a contest of wills. Aang's blue energy against Ozai's orange energy. For a moment, Ozai's energy nearly consumes Aang's. The corruption spreads up Aang's arms, across his body, toward his head. If Aang's spirit is not unbendable, the lion turtle warned, he will be destroyed. The show lingers on this contest. It is not a physical fight. There is no movement, no bending, no martial arts. 2 men stand motionless, locked in a struggle that happens entirely inside their bodies, at the level of spiritual energy. And the visual language tells you exactly what is at stake. Ozai's orange energy is the energy of a man who has never questioned his right to dominate, who has never felt doubt, who has built his entire identity on the certainty that he is the strongest person alive. Aang's blue energy is the energy of a boy who has questioned everything, who has doubted himself at every turn, who has been told by 4 dead avatars that his convictions are wrong and has held to those convictions anyway. The orange energy pushes inward. For a terrible moment, it looks like Ozai's certainty is stronger than Aang's. The corruption creeps across Aang's body. His blue light dims. You can see in the animation the moment where it almost fails, where Aang's spirit nearly breaks under the weight of Ozai's will, and then the blue holds. It pushes back, it surges, it overwhelms. A pillar of blue light shoots into the sky, the same light that appeared when Aang emerged from the iceberg in the first episode, the same light that has marked every major Avatar event in the series. The colour is not accidental. Blue is the colour of Aang's airbending tattoos. It is the colour of the spirit water that healed him after Azula's attack. It is the colour of the Avatar state's glow. The show has been building this visual vocabulary vocabulary for 3 seasons, and now it deploys it in full. Blue means Aang. Blue means the Avatar. Blue means the spirit of a boy who would not kill, who could not kill, and who found another way. When the light fades, Ozai is alive, but powerless. He tries to firebend. Nothing happens. He tries again. His hands are empty. The fire that defined him, the fire that his nation worshipped, the fire that he planned to use to burn the Earth Kingdom to ash, all of it is gone, and the boy who took it from him does not gloat. He does not celebrate. He says simply that he took away Ozai's firebending so that Ozai cannot hurt anyone anymore. And then he raises the tide and begins extinguishing the fires that Ozai's army has set across the coastline. That final gesture, the water bending that follows the energy bending, is often overlooked, but it matters. Aang does not walk away from Ozai and declare victory. He immediately turns to the next task. The world is on fire. People are dying. The war is not over just because the Fire Lord has been defeated. There is work to do, and Aang does it because that is what the Avatar does. The work is the point. It has always been the point. The finale aired on July 19th, 2008 as a 2-hour movie event. The 4-part finale averaged 5.6 million viewers, a 195% increase over the same time period the previous year. It was the most watched Nickelodeon program of the summer, and critics received it with near universal acclaim, praising its emotional depth, its animation quality, and its refusal to compromise the values it had spent 3 seasons establishing. The music, composed by Jeremy Zuckerman and performed for the first time with a live orchestra rather than the MIDI instruments used in earlier episodes, was singled out for particular praise. The Agni Kai between Zuko and Azula, scored with a melancholic piece inspired by the soundtrack work in Ghost in the Shell and Blade Runner, is widely considered one of the most beautiful sequences in animation history. The sound effects were intentionally quieted during that battle to let the music set the emotional tone. All of these production details matter because they tell you how seriously the creators took this ending. They did not rush it. They did not compromise it. They spent years building toward it, and when the time came to deliver, they elevated every aspect of the production to match the ambition of the story. The result is a finale that does not just conclude a plot, it completes a mythology. That is the story of every Avatar in history, told through the lens of a single series, building toward a single moment, one fused with Rava to fix a mistake. Sito governed a nation to prevent its collapse. Yangchen brokered impossible deals to maintain a fragile peace. Kuruk fought invisible wars that destroyed him from the inside. Kyoshi built institutions that outlived their purpose and became instruments of oppression. Roku showed mercy that was exploited and paid for it with his life and the lives of an entire civilization. And Aang, carrying all of that inside him, every triumph, every failure, every unintended consequence, every hard-won lesson, found a way that none of them had found. Not because he was smarter than them, not because he was more powerful, because he was different from them, because he was himself fully, in a role that constantly asks you to be everyone who came before you. The Avatar state offers you 10,000 years of knowledge and skill, but it does not offer you answers. The answers have to come from the person who holds the title, the individual human being who wakes up every morning knowing that the world depends on them and who has to decide, with their own conscience, how to carry that weight. The show understands this. It understands it so deeply that it structures the entire revelation of the Avatar mythology around this insight. Every past life is introduced at the precise moment when their story illuminates something about Aang's journey. Roku appears when Aang needs to understand the stakes, in an episode that establishes the ticking clock of the comet and the concept of past Avatar manifestation. Kyoshi appears when Aang needs to confront the possibility that doing the right thing might look like doing something terrible, in an episode that refuses to simplify the moral calculus of using lethal force. Kuruk appears, initially as a nameless image on a wave, when the show needs to demonstrate that the Avatar cycle encompasses all kinds of people, including those who coasted through the role and paid dearly for it. Yangchen appears when Aang needs to hear the hardest truth from the person he most expected to agree with him, in a scene designed to remove every excuse he might have for avoiding the confrontation with Ozai. The mythology is not a backdrop. It is a conversation unfolding in real time between a boy and the ghosts of everyone he used to be. And the final word in that conversation belongs to Aang, because the Avatar is not a chain. The Avatar is a person who carries a chain and who can choose in any given moment to add a new link to it rather than follow the existing ones. There is one more thing worth saying about the way the show handles its Avatar mythology, and it has to do with something the show chooses not to do. The show never ranks its avatars. It never declares one better or worse than another. It never suggests that Roku's era was more important than Kyoshi's, or that Yangchen's achievements surpassed Kuruk's sacrifices. Each avatar is presented on their own terms, with their own challenges, their own solutions, and their own failures. The show respects the individuality of each life, even as it connects them all into a single continuous story. This is not how most fiction handles legacy characters. Most franchises build hierarchies. They rank their heroes by power level, by popularity, by narrative importance. The Avatar franchise does not do this, and the refusal is meaningful. It tells you that the show believes every life matters equally, regardless of its scale of impact. Sito, who sat behind a desk and balanced budgets, is not less important than Kyoshi, who split a continent. Kuruk, who died young and broken, is not less valuable than Yangchen, who was worshipped for generations. The chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and the show refuses to identify any link as weak. That generosity of vision extends to Aang himself. The show does not present him as the greatest avatar who ever lived. It presents him as the latest, the most recent link in a chain that will continue after him. His victory over Ozai is not the end of the Avatar's story. It is a chapter in an ongoing narrative that has been running for 10,000 years and will run for 10,000 more. Aang will die someday, and the Avatar will be reborn into the Water Tribe, and that new Avatar will inherit a world shaped by Aang's choices, just as Aang inherited a world shaped by Roku's, and Kyoshi's, and Kuruk's, and Yangchen's, and Sito's, and One's. The cycle will turn, the work will continue, and the new Avatar will face problems that Aang could not foresee, just as Aang faced problems that Roku could not foresee, just as Roku faced problems that Kyoshi could not foresee. The beauty of this structure is that it teaches you something about time itself, about how the present is always the product of the past, and how the future is always the product of the present, and how the illusion of progress, the feeling that things are getting better, or that the problems are getting smaller, is just that. An illusion. The problems change, they do not shrink. And the people who face them are always, in some sense, starting over, because the specific combination of challenges that defines any given era has never existed before and will never exist again. The Avatar is the franchise's answer to that reality, not a solution to the problem of history, but a strategy for coping with it. The Avatar does not fix the world. The Avatar maintains it. The Avatar holds the line, and when the line breaks, as it inevitably does, as it did during Roku's lifetime and during the 100 years of Aang's absence, the Avatar's job is to show up and start repairs, knowing that the repairs will not last, knowing that the next Avatar will have to repair the repairs, knowing that this is the way it has always been and the way it will always be. That is the most mature insight in a series full of mature insights. And the show earns it not through a single speech or a single episode, but through the cumulative weight of 61 episodes worth of carefully constructed mythology, each piece placed with intention, each revelation timed for maximum impact, each past life introduced at the exact moment when their story changes the way you understand Aang's. The last thing to say about every Avatar in history is that none of them got everything right. One could not bring peace. Sito could not see beyond his own nation. Yangchen could not honor her own traditions while doing her duty. Kuruk could not pay attention until it was too late. Kyoshi could not foresee what her creations would become. Roku could not stop his best friend from becoming a monster. And Aang, for all his moral clarity, was a 12-year-old who ran away from home and spent 100 years in ice, while the world burned around him. The Avatar is the most powerful being in the world, and the Avatar is always inadequate. That is not a contradiction. That is the point. The show gives you 10,000 years of evidence that no single person can carry the weight of the world alone, that every attempt to do so produces consequences that the next person in line has to deal with, and that the cycle continues not because the Avatar succeeds, but because the Avatar tries, over and over, lifetime after lifetime, trying and failing and trying again. Consider what that pattern means from the perspective of each Avatar. You are born, you grow up. At some point you are told that you are the Avatar. The world's problems are placed on your shoulders. You spend years, sometimes decades, trying to master the four elements and learning to navigate the impossible political, spiritual, and moral landscapes that the role demands. You make choices. Some of them are brilliant, some of them are catastrophic, and eventually you die. And the next Avatar is born into the world you shaped, and they look at what you did, and they see both the good and the harm, and they start again. That is not a hero's journey. That is a relay race. Each runner carries the baton as far and as fast as they can, and then they pass it to the next, and the next runner does not get to choose their starting position. They start wherever the last runner left them. If the last runner stumbled, the next one starts from behind. If the last runner ran well, the next one starts with an advantage that they did not earn. Either way, they run. Because running is the job, because the race never ends. The show makes this relay structure visible in the way it orders the revelations about the past Avatars. Each one is introduced in the context of Aang's story, at the moment when their particular failure or insight becomes relevant to the challenge he is facing. But if you step back from Aang's perspective and look at the Avatars as a sequence, as a chain of people stretching back through time, a different pattern emerges. Each Avatar is responding to the world left behind by the one before. Each Avatar's greatest strength is a direct response to their predecessor's greatest weakness. Sito was a bureaucrat because the world he inherited needed governance, not adventure. Yangchen was a diplomat and peacemaker because Sito's nationalism had left the rest of the world unbalanced. Kuruk was, initially, a carefree and unambitious Avatar because Yangchen's diplomacy had created such a complete peace that there was nothing obvious for him to do. Kyoshi was a warrior and a builder of institutions because Kuruk's neglect had allowed chaos to creep back into the world. Roku was a moderate, a man of restraint and mercy because Kyoshi's aggressive approach had left scars that only gentleness could heal. And Aang was a pacifist monk because Roku's restraint had failed catastrophically and the world needed someone who would confront the consequences of inaction head on. Each Avatar is a correction. Each correction creates new problems. Each new problem produces a new Avatar who is, in essence, a correction of the correction. The pendulum swings, force and gentleness, action and reflection, nationalism and globalism, intervention and restraint. The cycle oscillates because the world oscillates, because human societies oscillate, because the fundamental tensions that drive conflict between freedom and order, between compassion and justice, between the individual and the collective, are never resolved. They are only managed. And the Avatar is the world's manager, a person whose job is not to solve the unsolvable, but to keep the unsolvable from destroying everything. There is something deeply comforting about that framework, even though it is, on its surface, somewhat bleak. The comfort comes from the persistence. The Avatar always returns. The cycle always continues. No matter how badly things go, no matter how catastrophic the failure, the world gets another chance. Another person is born, another life begins, and the work continues. Not because anyone deserves it, not because the world has earned it, but because Ra'ava made a promise to one on a battlefield 10,000 years ago, and that promise has been kept, life after life, without exception. Aang honours that promise in his own way. He does not end the cycle of failure. He adds to it the way every Avatar does, by leaving a world that is better in some ways and worse in others. A world where the Fire Nation has been defeated, but where the legacy of the war will take generations to heal, where the balance he restored is fragile and temporary, and will require another Avatar, someday, to restore it again. But he also adds something new. He adds the proof that the cycle is not destiny, that the past lives advise but do not command, that an air nomad boy can find a way to honor both his heritage and his duty, to be both gentle and strong, to wield absolute power and choose absolute restraint, and that this choice, this refusal to accept the limits of what his predecessors imagined, is itself a kind of bending, a bending of the cycle itself. The show ends where it must. The war is over. Zuko is crowned Fire Lord, and in his coronation speech, he promises to rebuild the world alongside the Avatar. Iroh opens a tea shop in Ba Sing Se. The friends gather. Aang and Katara share a kiss as the sun sets. The music swells, and the story closes. But the mythology does not close. The mythology cannot close, because the Avatar cycle is, by definition, open-ended. Aang will live his life, he will grow old, he will die, and the Avatar will be reborn into the Water Tribe as a girl named Korra. And Korra will face her own challenges, inherit her own set of problems that Aang's choices created, and make her own decisions about how to carry the weight. That future exists in the extended franchise, and it is worth knowing about. But it is not the story the original series tells. The original series tells the story of one boy and his relationship with the ghosts inside him, and the way those ghosts, one by one, teach him who he is by showing him who they were. The series does not need the future to be complete. It does not need the origin story to be complete. It is complete in itself. 61 episodes of carefully constructed mythology, each piece in its place, each revelation earned by everything that came before it. There is a way of reading the Avatar cycle that treats it as a metaphor for something simpler than mythology, something every person recognizes from their own life. The Avatar inherits the consequences of the generation before. The Avatar tries to fix what was broken, and in the process, breaks something new. The Avatar passes the results along to the next generation. That is not just the Avatar's story, that is the human story. Every parent leaves their children a world that they shaped, but could not perfect. Every teacher passes along knowledge that is incomplete. Every generation inherits institutions that were built with good intentions, and that have calcified, or corrupted, or simply outlived their original purpose. And every generation has the same choice that every Avatar has. Accept the inheritance, understand its flaws, and do the best you can with what you were given. The show understands this parallel and never makes it explicit. It does not need to. The resonance is in the structure. The Avatar is not a fantasy character with a fantasy problem. The Avatar is a person trying to do the right thing in a world that makes the right thing difficult, with the additional weight of knowing that thousands of people tried before them and none of them fully succeeded. That is not fantasy, that is Tuesday morning, and the show's genius is in recognizing that the fantasy elements, the bending, the spirits, the glowing eyes and elemental spheres are all in service of that fundamentally human truth. 61 episodes, 3 seasons, 7 named avatars stretching back 10,000 years, a lion turtle with a gift older than bending itself, a war that lasted 100 years, a boy who froze himself in ice because he was afraid, and a finale where that boy, carrying the accumulated weight of every life that came before him, refused to let that weight make his choice for him. The show premiered on a Saturday afternoon on Nickelodeon in February 2005. It aired alongside SpongeBob SquarePants and The Fairly Odd Parents. Its target audience was 6 to 11 years old, and within that format, within those constraints, it built one of the most sophisticated mythologies in the history of serialized storytelling. It treated children as intelligent audiences capable of engaging with themes of genocide, imperialism, moral complexity, and the burdens of inherited responsibility. It did not simplify. It did not condescend. It trusted its audience to grow alongside the story, and its audience rewarded that trust by carrying the show in their hearts for 2 decades and counting. The Avatar cycle is 10,000 years of people doing their best. That is the whole story. And the reason the story endures, the reason people return to this show years and decades after it first aired, is that doing your best is the only story that matters. Not succeeding, not winning, not being right. Just showing up day after day, life after life, and doing the work of keeping the world from falling apart. that. The work of choosing compassion when force is easier, the work of carrying a burden that you did not choose and cannot put down and would not trade for anything. Every avatar in history carried that burden, and every one of them, in their own imperfect, insufficient, beautiful way, kept the world turning for one more generation. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.